Here we are again at the last installment of student samples for the term. A couple things you might notice here right away. You might have seen this already on your papers that you got back from me, but really MLA says no font changes for your title. Should look exactly the same. There also shouldn't be this space right here. That's fine. That's sort of the least of the problems, but it is something that I and your other readers will notice fairly straight away. I think these three samples that you read for this week are probably the most straightforward of the ones we've read. There's nothing really terribly tricky about these. Um, this first example, a lot of folks talk about it as being sort of mean or condescending to the audience, and I think that's one of the real challenges. There is kind of a tone problem. Um, here says, unfortunately, many parents, such as yourselves, feel that having sex education taught in schools is morally wrong and promotes promiscuity. Um, that's probably true. And she's got an audience here that is sort of parents who oppose sex education already. But this kind of tone here, your attempts to ban sex ed in schools are threatening your child's safety and health, as well as the safety and health of every other child. If I'm a parent, I'm probably going to stop reading because I really feel like this person hasn't honored my beliefs. One thing here, I've seen this often this term, it's not really clear what this source is referring to. If we're talking about this one sentence before, or if we're talking about these two sentences before, we don't know. We really need the signal phrase. And that's a problem that pervades this essay. Um, sorry. Um, so here, we've got it. Maybe this wrangle is this source. Maybe it's this, or there's a second one here, but this citation might lead to this whole essay back here. Okay. I think she does a pretty reasonable job here of having some paragraphs that are developed that use source material in support of her main ideas. Um, I've seen this a lot too in some of the debates, I think. And anytime you're using yourself as a source, then your reader is going to want to know who you are and what right you have to speak about these things. Are you a concerned parent? Great, let them know that. Are you a medical expert that's been studying this for 30 years? Great, let them know that. But the authors do have an inherent credibility, but that inherent credibility only goes so far. And so you've really got to work to establish that and build bridges. That's compounded here by the fact that the readers kind of mean it, or the writers kind of mean it nasty at the beginning of the essay. Let's look at those sources there for a minute. These sources aren't bad. MLA citation has changed these days, so you don't really need this stuff. And again, there would be no sort of font title or font change in the title there. It's a little messy. That might happen when I transfer this over into a different document. But I feel like I could go find these. We got the American Journal of Law and Medicine. That's a good source. 2002, that's reasonably recent. So really the challenge with this essay is in the tone that the author takes. And I propose you take a big picture regarding teenage pregnancies. Well, I think that's what most people think that they are doing. So particularly with contentious issues like this, if you're asking a wide group of people to change their belief, and that's really what she's asking here, that they change their belief, you've got to work hard to show that you've got some shared values and that your proposal is actually going to allow those values to more clearly come forth. All right, so on to essay number 2. All right, folks, welcome back to sample number 2. Clearly better than the first sample, in large part because of the tone, but there are some real strengths and some real weaknesses. Got a lot to say, so I've got to go kind of quick. First, this author actually has 3 paragraphs of introduction. This is sort of generally about what's happening with children, sort of moves to be more specific about gender stereotypes down here at the end, moves in the next paragraph to be more specific about single-sex education, and sort of provide some background on single-sex education, and then provides the author's thesis. Now, folks, I think she probably could have put this all into one paragraph. She chooses to put it into three to emphasize the sort of different stages, but it still goes from that very broad to the very narrow. For me, it's a little difficult to see this as a proposal. It seems more like an informative essay. She's hoping to raise the knowledge of certain advantages. And it's not really clear who her audience is. I'm guessing, fairly formal, but it's also somebody she feels comfortable using I with. As I said before, if you're going to set yourself up as an expert, let us know who you are so we know what you know about the subject. This is all background information. I hope you are all recoiling in horror as you see this Wikipedia citation. Wikipedia, great place to start, great place for information, really fabulous revolution in the history of information, not good enough for an academic essay. Anybody can change those, and they change all the time. Yeah. So this is all research. This is a good example here of sources and how they can be, where the gray lines are at. Two sentences here, right, with a citation at the end. Now, I can tell that the first sentence here is from the author, and then that means that the second sentence here is from the source. I think most reasonable readers are going to be able to see that difference. For me, this is fine. When we move on to this paragraph here, things for me become more problematic. One, because it looks like the entire paragraph is coming from a source. Obviously, this material is coming from a source, right? We're going to assume that's the good source that's labeled here. And that means it looks like all of this material is coming from a source. Really, we're looking for a balance. You to lead the sources, you to integrate the sources at the end. There are a couple sentences here where it's not quite sure, where it's not precisely clear to me that this material is coming from a source. This one in particular, seems like it might be the author's interpretation. This one seems like it may be coming from one way or the other. So folks, balance and clarity, essential. Here's leading with evidence. Always lead with a claim or at least some kind of transition. If you're offering additional evidence, please offer additional evidence. And let us know that you're doing that. A couple of things here. We've got this statement here. The ideas behind things are less important than how you convey them, or they're equally important. Here we have a boy at a public high school is usually labeled a nerd or a jock. Well, I just don't think that's true. I mean, that's an either-or fallacy pretty clearly. And I think in this sentence here, she gets to the same ideas but conveys them differently. Adolescent gender expectations make it difficult for boys and girls alike to find out who they are and what they want to do with their life. I think that claim is much more palatable for the audience. Speaking of the audience, I'm sort of jumping here to the end because we're about out of time. But here, finally, is where she demonstrates who the audience is. PTA, Parent-Teacher Association. And I think her tone is pretty reasonable through that. But the paper is much more about the value of single-sex education than it is a proposal to the PTA. And that's a shift in focus that I would encourage. So again, we have Wikipedia. Single-sex schools, clearly an organization devoted to advocating for this. Nothing wrong with that. In particular when it's backed up with other sources like this developmental brain research one, and this one, which is a formal source, peer-reviewed source. Right, a lot of like neuropsychology stuff in here, which is great. Christian Science Monitor, perfectly reputable public media organization for this kind of message. So definitely some strengths in the quality of sources and in the way that they are generally used. Some weaknesses in that area as well, with a shift in focus towards being a real proposal for a real audience. Thanks. All right, folks, here we are with the final sample of the term. This is easily the best one of the three that you read. It's the most specific. It's the most narrowly targeted towards a particular audience. It's the best. It's got the best in the way of development, and really, demonstrates a fine line between being personable and being formal. So this is a proposal for a full-day kindergarten. And here we have what they are asking. She's speaking on behalf of the PTA, or a group of concerned parents. You can take that. I mean, that's a rhetorical trick. You can take that and pretend that you're actually advocating for that. But here she gives credence to her audience, credit to her audience. You know this already. We know that. She's fairly formal in this. Um, State boards of higher education. She's talking about, she's clearly informed about this. And she knows where they are, the school districts, and where they're trying to go to this exceptional rating. Now, this language gets a little trite. We know that you understand, blah blah blah. But at least it's there, and at least she's sort of respecting that audience. I think you gotta do that. She's very specific in her details through here. That's really good. Um, she uses their own website here, Beaverton School District, and I think that's going to make things, more palatable for your audience if you're using sources that are going to work better for them. We know something. Again, that might be the only sort of small qualm I've got with this. But she's demonstrating how knowledgeable she is. She talks about Susan Castillo. She's the Portland Director of Portland Public Schools. But her audience is going to know who she is. She addresses their concerns in a clear topic sentence. Okay, here's what's going on. Here's what's going to have to happen. Here's my information in support of that. Here's my response to that argument. I know this is coming from a source. Although I think there does need to be a citation in here. She looks at other funding alternatives here. So like, these are the problems, these are the other alternatives. This is how we are going to respond to those alternatives, why our solution is the best. And then she gives them some credence here as well. So full day kindergarten. So we got a personal interview, we got a superintendent, mossfoundation.org from the Lake Oswego School District. That's what that is. Very local organizations, Oregon State Department, another school district here, Tiger Tualatin School District. Very local sources, very reputable for this audience. So there's some things that she really does well here. She really plays to the audience. There's very clear main ideas in her topic sentences. She answers the rebuttal that audience will have. She addresses other proposals, and she makes it clear that she respects her audience throughout. I think this is, it's a really strong proposal argument, and I encourage you to take things from it and use in your own essay. If you got questions, let me know.